This is my first review on the channel of a Cold Steel knife. I thought I would go ahead and do a review on this Cold Steel Code 4. I do really like this knife and I'll go into some of that. Now before I jump into that, I do want to just mention that Cold Steel has kind of gotten a bad rap among a lot of knife enthusiasts. There's a lot of I think there's a lot of like ill will toward Cold Steel based on their marketing strategy that they used, especially real heavily back in the 90s. But I gotta say, Cold Steel is really one of the knives that got me into knives. One of the knife brands that got me into knives. At the time when I was a kid in the 90s, I know that really what I had experience with was like buck knives and Schrade knives, old timers, things like that. And the first Cold Steel I got my hands on just literally blew me away compared to those other knives. So I've got to say I owe a lot to Cold Steel as far as getting me into knives. They still kind of have a special spot in my heart. So I know they had over the top marketing and they, all their proof series and all that stuff. But I got to say overall, they still made really good knives for the price point that they were in. Now, over the years, there have been a few things that I'll mention here that I've kind of not been real thrilled with Cold Steel on, but I still own quite a few of them, and I got to say, overall, I'm still fairly happy with them. So this particular model is the Cold Steel Code 4. This is a knife that basically, as far as my use for this knife, this kind of falls in one of my I have a category that I call my dress knives. These are knives when I'm dressing up that I wear because they just look nice. This is my most overbuilt dress knife. This thing is a beast as far as just built to feel like it could take just about anything. You wouldn't have to use it or baby it in any way. This thing feels like it could really take a beating. But let me go ahead and get into some of the specs of the knife first, and then I'll tell you kind of my thoughts overall of this knife. So the knife itself is kind of on the larger, medium to large size. It is a 8.5 inch overall knife with a blade that is 3.5 inches. So anything under the 4 inch blade length, I feel, is sufficient for an everyday carry knife. If you're gonna be carrying the knife on a regular basis, I feel like that is a good length. So that 3.5 blade really works well for me. You can see it's a clip point style blade. I love clip points. I just like the way they look. You can also get this in various blade styles if you don't like the clip point. That's my favorite, so that's what I have. This is a little bit older model. This actually comes with, and you should be able to see it here on the back, I believe. It's the CTS XHP steel that Carpenter makes. So that is actually a pretty decent high-end steel. It's not one of the premium super steels, but it is a pretty decent high-end steel. Currently, if you were to pick this up, a newer model, it actually comes in S35VN. And my understanding is Cold Steel switched to the S35VN because the Carpenter, the CTS XHP was just getting too hard for them to source. Now, as far as the difference between the steels, you can really get into nitpicking the difference, but basically it's a very similar steel. You're not really taking a big hit in quality either way. I personally prefer the XHP just a little bit over the S35VN, but that's a personal preference. I don't think you're going to find a whole lot of difference in the way these two steels operate, whether it's just holding an edge or sharpening or any of that. I think that they're going to be very similar. So I don't think you can go wrong there. You do have the aluminum, the 6061 aluminum scales, which is just a nice look. But that brings me to kind of maybe one of the first negatives of this knife. These handle scales are completely smooth. I mean, there is no texturing of any kind. These are glass smooth scales. So you have no grip whatsoever on this thing. If your hands were to get sweaty or to get slick, you're not going to have any kind of grip on this knife. And that is kind of the one downside. Again, that is partially also one of the reasons I use it as a dress knife. I don't plan on working with it in a way that my hands are going to get real dirty, wet, slick, and where that lack of grip is going to be a big issue. One of the things that I've thought about, and maybe one of these days I'll do, if you were going to buy this knife maybe as a gift or something, the nice thing about the aluminum is you could get that engraved, and maybe getting some engraving on that would actually give you some texture that would provide a better grip. So I think that's an option if you're somebody who really likes the look of this knife, but you don't like the fact that there's no grip. Being aluminum like it is, you could probably do some engraving and it might look pretty nice on that. You're going to notice that it does not have a deep carry clip on it, but it is reversible for left or right carry, but not tip up or tip down. One of the other big benefits of this knife is it has Cold Steel's Triad lock. If you've never heard about the Triad lock, I would recommend you do a little bit of looking into that or research into that. It's just one of the strongest locks on the market. And it's built in such a way that the more use that you use, or the more you use this knife, the more the parts get worn. They actually settle in deeper and they actually lock in tighter. So it's not like you're going to wear out this lock in a way that it ceases to function the way that it should. Now, I will state that, a lot of the knives that I've done so far on this channel have been knives with flippers or ball bearing, pivot action and all that, and so they're really smooth to open. With the Cold Steel, with that Triad lock being as tight and strong and solid as it is, you can open this with one hand, but you've got to do a little bit of a wrist flick. This is not, it's just too stiff. It's not that it's not smooth, there's no hang up there. It's just too stiff to really open it without having to flick your wrist a little bit to get some momentum behind the blade. Again, I mentioned that this thing kind of just feels like it's built like a tank. It's a very solid feeling knife. There's no play, wiggle, everything fits right and tight. They did a great job on that. Now, I do want to mention the one thing that I've noticed with a lot of newer Cold Steel knives, and by newer, I really just mean in the last 10 years or so. So it's not, it's not just a real recent issue. It's definitely been an issue that I've noticed. I didn't see this problem in the 90s knives or even some of the early 2000s, but after that I started noticing it. If you look at this blade, you're going to notice that, and hopefully I can get this into focus here. I don't know why this thing doesn't want to focus. It's like its autofocus isn't working here, but all right, so right here at the tip, so you can see that the knife is fairly well centered, but I don't know if you can see there. Let me see if I can get that. If you can see here at the tip of the blade, the grinds on that knife, they're just really, let me try this. They're just really off here. Man, I can't get that to focus. But anyway, you're going to notice that the angle of the bevel on the one side is just way, way different than the angle of the bevel on the other side. Maybe there you can kind of see it. It's just really, really off. I don't know what degree angle they have on one side versus the other, but they're not the same by any means. I know these things are sharpened supposedly by hand, so you can understand having a little bit of issue with uniformity, but the last several Cold Steel knives that I've gotten, that has been instantly noticeable that the grinds are just not at all equal. Now you'll notice, again, I mentioned this is a dress knife, which means it doesn't see a lot of heavy use. So I've not really ever had to even resharpen the blade at this point, and so I've never gone and straightened those edges out. It is still extremely sharp. This thing is definitely hair shaving sharp, so there's no problem there. But it just really bothers me having those uneven grinds on that blade. So really, one of these points, I need to just go ahead and reprofile the knife just so that it doesn't bother me. But like I said, it is so sharp that it's not really been much of a problem. It's just frustrating that a brand new knife, when you get it, would come out with grinds that are that uneven. So that is one of the problems that I've noticed with Cold Steel knives here in the last 10 years or so. Fairly common problem that I've had with them is that they're just not nailing those angles on the bevels. They still manage to get it sharp, but it's just not uniform at all, and it just looks off. Other than that, I got to say, though, like I've mentioned, I've had good luck with Cold Steel. They seem to really nail the heat treat on their blades. A lot of their blades, the steel's a lot better than it should be. Definitely back in the 90s, the AUS 8 knives that I got from Cold Steel. I know AUS 8 is a mid-grade steel, and it performed way better than it should have. And so ever since then, I've kind of trusted them to get the heat treat down right on their knives, and I've not really been disappointed with that. But every now and then you do have fit and function issues that I've noticed, and like I mentioned, some of those grinds. This one, fit and function is not really an issue. Everything, like I said, is right and tight. But the issue that I do run into is just that one of the aesthetics where those grinds are just not even close to the same. So that does bother me. So as far as the Code 4, what would I say? What would be my kind of takeaway from this knife? Well, right now, you can pick up the clip point for about $100, which is pretty expensive for a knife. I think back when I bought this thing, I might have paid 70 for it. I would say for $100, I feel like I could get a better knife than this. Uh, but you're right at that point where you're not going to get something much better than this for $100. Uh, as far as just the knife itself, if you like the look of it and you think you'd like to carry one, I'm going to recommend it. It's a great knife. I do like the way it looks. I like everything about. I even like the way it feels in the hand. Other than it does kind of put me off a little that there's no traction or grip on this blade. I just feel like without that, my hands tend to get sweaty, and I'd be a little worried about hanging on to it if I needed to. If I got in a situation where I really needed to use the knife, then I might not be able to hang on to it. But other than that, I gotta say, I like this knife. The Code 4, if you're in the market for a knife that just looks nice, has the aluminum scales, has a lock that you know is not ever going to fail on you. That Triad lock is just bulletproof. And you're not necessarily into all the ball bearing and flipper type action. You're okay with just having the thumb stud. As I mentioned, you can still open this one-handed, no problem. I mean, if you're not looking into flying, having the blade fly out or flinging it out real fast, you can easily open it one-handed, slow and smooth, and with a little bit of a flick, you can get it out quick. But you've got to kind of flick the blade. You flick your wrist to do that. But again, some people aren't worried about how fast they can get the blade out. The fact that you can get it out with one hand and that it'll open reliably and smoothly and then lock up reliably is more important to them. And that lock, like I said, the Triad lock, you can't go wrong with that on a cold steel knife. Overall, feels good in the hand. It's built very solid. You're not going to have any issues with the build quality on it. If you're looking for a knife that, you like the look of this thing and you want to have one that you could put through the ringer and it's still going to stand up to any abuse you throw at it, I think you can't really go wrong with this. And I think I mentioned the new ones now are coming out with that S35VN, which is still a great high-end steel. It's not one of your super steels, but it's on the high-end side, and I think you're going to have a lot of good luck with that. So I definitely would recommend the knife. If I was just rating it on a rating for a $100 knife, I think I'd probably get a 6 out of 10, and the main reason for the 6 out of 10 is it's missing some of the features that your other $100 knives would have. That action's not quite as smooth. Again, the lacking the traction on the scales, but that may be something you're okay with. Belt clip is only reversible 2 ways, not 4 ways. So I think for $100 you might be able to get something that's got a little more flexibility. But all that being said, I don't want to give away the impression that I don't like this knife. I do really like the Code 4 from Cold Steel. It's a great knife, and if you're looking into one and you don't think you're going to mind having the slicker handles without any traction or grip on those, or like I said, if maybe you think you'd like to etch those, get something engraved into them, then I think you couldn't go wrong. I think you'll enjoy the knife.